Okay, welcome back to the first inaugural episode of this thing we're doing now, which is the first time we've done this thing, and therefore it's funny when you say welcome back because there was never a first, because this is the first. Oh, jokes. Okay, what are we doing here? Great question. Glad I asked. Well, we are. Let's tell you what we are. Well, we're humans. It turns out, and this is Shannon, and this is Austin, and we here are on the interwebs with one mission: to save you from well yourself, because you're probably a monster in wolf's clothing, wrapped in sheep's clothing. And what do I mean by that? Well, if Solzhenitsyn is right, in that the line of good and evil runs betwixt the heart of every man, guess what? That means you. Now, what does that mean for you in the context of what you see here with Shannon and I? Well, I was just thinking today for our first fest here that we could talk about one thing. And it's something like, let's say for context, we're talking about relationships. How about working with your partner? Running a business, where running a business itself is hard. How about running one with your partner, where there's, I don't know, a million ways things could go completely wrong? So here's the setup. This is what I was thinking we talk about tonight, or today, whenever these people watch this thing, is how do we become, in the words of Nassim Taleb in his book, Antifragile, how do we become anti-fragile? Meaning, if you haven't read that book, whoever is watching this thing on the other side of the moon or Earth or Saturn, etc., is how do you gain from disorder? So how can you position yourself in the context of a relationship where when things go, as the Brits say, tits up, you actually benefit from it? So that's a topic that I want to pose to you, and I'm going to not look at Shannon because every time I do, I'm staring into the sun with this light. So I'm going to look straight. So don't think I'll do it. I'll go blind. It's okay. So here's a question for you tonight. How is it that you think that people that are in relationships that are fighting against their inner worlds and the million different impulses that they have and the innumerable selves that are at war for the spotlight of attention, never mind their selfishness and the rest of it, which is the same thing, I guess. How is it that a couple can gain from disorder? Are there tactics, strategies that people could have in the context of a relationship to gain from disorder? Now, to set this up, what I mean specifically is, let's say Shannon and I run a interior-scaping company, okay? And guess what? We make a lot of mistakes, and we've probably made mistakes that have affected people in the past with making, I don't know, we pissed off the client or God knows what, okay? How is it that we can position ourselves or have to gain from that? Mindsets, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we give each other grace and we fail forward, and the time between the mistake being made and the remedy or the solution that we implement to fix that or learn from that is short. So we don't dwell on things. We'll look at a failure or perceived failure and we'll say, hey, how did we learn from this? And then we recalibrate. And that time that it takes us between realizing that we messed up and actually making a solution or a progressive step forward is very short.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think there's a couple things that jump to mind. One, one is it's good to have frameworks in your brain that you can turn to when you're stuck and you're like, shit, what do I do here? How do I act? One that comes to mind is Hanlon's razor. And that's simply put the principle of charity, if I'm not conflating the two. And that's taking a step, practically speaking, in the context. I think there's a homeless person screaming on the street. Welcome to 2023. In downtown Denver, roughly speaking. Hanlon's razor, though, what is that? Well, let's assume that we have a bad day, because it's called being human and we all have bad days. And we happen to say something that is unsettling, or just like it could be misconstrued as being mean or whatever. Hanlon's razor would say, well, okay, there's probably a multitude of ways you can interpret what they said. What is the most charitable interpretation you could give them? And what could you, or rather, it's almost like a steelman argument where you take what they say and you put it in the best possible light and assume they meant that, and not the worst possible light. Oh my God, I can't believe she said that evil, mean thing, when maybe it's like she just said something that was intended to be kind or whatever, or vice versa, and it just wasn't received correctly. So Hanlon's razor, the principle of charity, interpreting things through the lens of the best possible interpretation. And that's not really going to benefit you in a way that drives gain from disorder or chaos. But I think there's one that you've said to me that I have cited before that jumps to mind. And this is actually what I oriented this entire topic around. Now, I'm going to set it up, and then I want you to explain it if you're open to that. Mm-hmm. Cool. It's stoic in nature, and it's this idea, okay? So you cannot control anything external. Everything that happens external to you is necessarily going to happen because it's outside of your span of control. So when you lose a client, when you blow through your ad budget way too fast because you were a moron and didn't do it correctly, or set up your PPC campaign wrong, or whatever, and you upset your client or your partner, or you lose an employee because they think your decision is dumb, or whatever it might be, it's this. It's to remember that this is happening
for you and because of you,
and not
to you.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's an empowering way of taking control over what might be perceived as the uncontrollable or out of your control. It's taking extreme ownership for everything in your life, realizing that things are happening because of you and for you instead of to you. It's taking the victim, and it's turning yourself into a victim, transforming yourself into a victor by reframing. Mm-hmm. And it's really powerful when you think about it, because it helps you shift back to what I was talking about before, with being able to shift those perspectives quickly. When you realize that, it just takes a quick second, you can realize, oh, wow, okay, there's something for this. And then you start looking for the opportunities. You start empowering yourself to make the change. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You don't get to opt out of the challenges of life, the suffering that falls upon you, or the calamities that are going to come your way, and they will come your way. And you know they're going to come your way because you've experienced them. Mm-hmm. So what can you do cognitively or emotionally or rationally? In fact, you could say that emotions are downstream of thought, and thoughts can be manipulated by what you tell yourself or how you choose to orchestrate and architect the self-talk happening between your two ears. And so it's helpful to have language games that you can play verbally that then inform the way that you think. Mm-hmm. So here's the takeaway from my estimation. If you want to gain from disorder and become stronger in the same way that when you get your ass under a barbell and you sweat as you're squatting, okay, you can do the same thing when adversity finds you. And it's this: the next time you find yourself saying, oh my God, this shitty, terrible thing is happening to me, pause and say, hey, that car wreck that Shannon was just in is happening for me. Somewhere in it, somehow, some way, there is something that is going to give you an edge. Or in the words of Napoleon Hill, for every adversity, there's an equal and proportionate advantage. Look for it, and then own it and claim it when you find it. And that will make you impervious, such that when any calamity, chaos, or confusion comes your way, you can gain from it.
Amen.
I think that's a decent spot to end tonight for a short little blurb here, starring yours truly and hers truly.
Good night.